Alright, so it's been a little while since I've even opened the project for Paper Dungeons. Let's see, I got it right here. But I realized that today has to be more of a design-focused episode. So essentially, what Paper Dungeons is okay. Let's see. Let's try that. Let's do another take. Okay. Essentially, what Paper Dungeons is going to be is a very old school inspired dungeon crawler where you can move in four directions. You can look in four directions. You can move in four directions, and it's all going to be eventually illustrated on real pieces of paper and then photographed and sort of imported into the game. Right now, I'm using a 3D engine with actual 3D models rather than just pictures for convenience because I don't want to have to take thousands of photos and then throw them away later when I realize they don't work for the game. Um, and so I've gotten the very basic movement system done. Like it's very bare bones, but it works. And the issue I'm facing now is I don't really want to do random dungeon generation. I really want to do like handmade, but that means I need to make some decisions. So, for example, how big is the dungeon? What's in the dungeon? How do you, the player, interact with the dungeon? And I'm not going to make a dungeon delver without at least thinking about these things. And essentially, what it came down to is I've played Diablo 1, I've played, Ultima 1, play, and even like there's like a Minecraft it's dungeons. I've played the arcade version of that. And in all of these games, what's most fun is you have, three or whatever, you have like three-ish attack types, right? You got the sword, you got the bow, you got magic. That represents magic. Don't worry about it. Um, and they have different ranges, they have different abilities, that sort of thing. And using them together in conjunction, Minecraft Dungeons does this by far the best. Diablo sort of does it. The Ultima kind of doesn't. And so I want to, in this turn-based game, make it so that you're constantly like, how do I maximize, how do I maximize my efficiency doing that? And so the system that I've been thinking about is essentially you have your health bar. System I've been thinking about is essentially you have your health bar, right? This is how not dead you are. You have your hunger bar. Classically, we represent this with a little stick of, there we go. And this is not a bar per se, but you also have your arrow count. So arrows. And I'm gonna do what The Sims does. So in The Sims, you have a fridge, right? Has food in there. But what happens is not what happens in real life is if I want food in my fridge, I go to the store, I take some food from there, bring it back to my house, and then it goes in the fridge, and then I can go to the fridge anytime and eat the food, right? Uh, Sims does not have really places other than your house, especially the earlier games, right? It doesn't simulate in any great detail your work or any place you're like parks or anything like that. You're sort of stuck with your neighborhood. This is a commentary on the failure of the American suburban experiment by accident, but that's neither here nor there, right? So in The Sims, you have your sim, it has a little diamond over its head because it's The Sims. You go to your fridge, you say, hello, I'd like some food, and it charges you, 3 simoleons or whatever. And so I want the same system for arrows. So basically, when you kill a monster, it drops some gold, and that gold goes into your gold pouch, which is simulated by a number at the top of the screen or whatever. And then when you fire an arrow, it just subtracts the gold automatically. So essentially, there's three resource systems, right? So when you have your sword, it doesn't require any resources whatsoever, but the risk is higher, right? So essentially, it has a percentage chance of costing you health. right? So if I am, here's my hero, right? If I'm this close to a big scary monster, it's got big arms or whatever, what's my risk of taking damage? High. But if I'm like over here, my risk is low. But in order to deal damage, I need to use some resources. And so in Ultima, hunger, and not just in Ultima 1, but I like Ultima 1 the best. Hunger sort of it slowly lowers over time, and you need to spend money to get more hunger, right? But you can only do that in a town. And so when you're out and about exploring, your hunger slowly ticks down, and so you need to visit towns periodically to refill it. And so the fact that you can take money and you can buy money, turn into food is sort of inconsequential. The real resource is the real resource is that trip, right? So if you're here and you want to go way over here, but you have to stop for food in the middle, then you have to make a detour. That costs time, and also because there's overworld monsters, you'll have to get into more fights probably because of that detour. And you can see how these systems all sort of overlap, but it wasn't quite intentionally designed in the way that I like. And so basically, here's how I want it to work, right? So sword, so if you get hit, you lose health, right? And the sword, you're most likely to get hit because you're closest, so it essentially costs health. Now arrows, right? They cost money, and that money is taken away automatically. So you don't have to visit the town. Obviously, you can't fire an arrow if you don't have enough money, and I think that there should also be upgrades. So there should be like a super arrow that costs more money to fire or whatever. And then magic increases the rate at which you lose hunger. So you'll lose hunger. You lose hunger over time anyway, but magic, you lose hunger faster. Right. And so great. So here's the three resource systems, one for each sort of kind of thing. And then also I don't know if I'll get this far, but I do want to be able to mix and match. So you can have magic arrows, which, minus two kinds of resources, but more damage or whatever. Or you can have a magic sword, like all this sort of stuff. Um Now I want to make sure that I differentiate magic from arrows. So arrows are very straightforward. You shoot them, they deal damage, that's kind of it. So I think that it might be interesting to have magic be more of a support or utility role. So you're not going to have like a magical arrow, right? But you might have, set a tile on fire for some amount of time, or like poison, or like pushing, crowd control, that sort of thing. Any of those things. And so here we get into the challenge of coding this, right? Uh, so you have sword. It deals damage. That's very easy. You just say, "Hello, enemy. Your health is lower now." And the same thing is true with an arrow. It just hits the enemy. It deals some amount of damage. But the magic spells, you have to program each one. And so, if for example you have a tile you want to set on fire, um, you need to. There's a whole system you have to build. It isn't just like it's not just free, if that makes sense. And so it feels like magic is going to be a significant portion of the programmer's time to make work. Um, Now, obviously, there's advantages to this. Like once you've gotten the fire spell, you can have like a fire arrow or whatever, or a sort of a set like the sword that like when you swing it, it sets the floor on fire, which is kind of cool. So like it creates crowd control, but also you can't step on that tile, which is more of an issue when you're right next to the tile. And so like every magic effect I'm probably going to reuse, but like the magic does require the most of my time. So I think I need to keep magic. Magic is the one I need to keep most in check, right? So if you have, sword A and sword B, maybe I need to draw a new picture for them or whatever, but it's just this is -6, this is -12 or whatever in terms of damage. That's just changing one number. It takes 5 minutes. Same with bows. Um, I was thinking about maybe even doing crossbows. So crossbows, um, I don't know if I want to do dual wielding. I think I just want to have like you have a weapon, right? You have your and then there's like switch speed. Like I think I'm just gonna say switch speed is free. So we're just gonna pretend that you have 3 hands. So you get the sword. Actually, you have like 5 hands, right? You have the sword. You got the bow and arrow. You got the magic. Um, you got another hand for like whatever potion you might be drinking. Do I want to do potions? I think I don't. I think it's actually more fun if there's no like free healing, because in Ultima 1, which is the game that I'm most closely modeling, the gameplay loop is basically you have a quest that comes from the king. King says go into the dungeon, right? Right, you go down the dungeon, you fight some monsters. Oh no, you're kind of beat up. Well, great. Just go back out the dungeon, and you get plus your health, and honestly, usually plus more. So I think it's based on the number of monsters you kill. So if you do it efficiently, you'll gain more health than you lost. And that only applies to health though, so you still need to go back to town for food. I think it might be interesting also if loot mostly gets dropped in the form of like gems or whatever, which it might be worth 80 gold, but this is not gold, right? Right. So you can't. So you can turn gold into arrows. But you can't turn diamonds into arrows. Diamonds you have to go to town. You have to and then you have to like shop, right? And you go to a shop and then you can turn it into gold. I can't spell gold today, and then you can turn that into arrows. So the and so you basically do need to like leave the dungeon every so often to restock your supplies. And here's where you get into another design problem. So if using your sword only really costs health, and you can get health free for just leaving the dungeon, and shooting arrows costs money, and using magic, which I still don't have a good symbol for, costs hunger. Why would I ever use these two when this is just free? Like you just fight the monsters in the dungeon. You're like, okay, I'm kind of beat up. I go out of the dungeon. I think honestly, just say you have to rest in a town. So in Ultima 1, you get out of the dungeon, right? And bam, health. I think it might be more interesting if you have to get from the dungeon to the town and then rest. And then you get the health back. And probably the resting costs some sort of money or um I know Swords and Sandals had this kind of interesting system where you don't what do you call it? Where's my mouse? Where when you rest in a tavern or whatever, you just get like plus health, and it costs a little money. But you can also sleep on the street, and there'll be a random event, so you might lose all money. Right, you might gain a little money. Right, because someone stole it, right? So and like that's pretty easy to do. It's just moving a couple numbers around. So that basically has the core gameplay loop as you've got the town, you got the dungeon, you got some sort of barrier in the middle, so there's monsters between them, and then basically you just go back and forth. So town, so you go to the town, you go to the dungeon, you say you leave the dungeon, and you're like, oh no, I'm kind of beat up. I gotta avoid the monsters or something. You go back to the town, you get stronger equipment, you refill all your things, and that's sort of, which sounds boring when I say it this way, but this sort of like gradually powering up mechanic. I played the original Dragon Quest, and it felt really satisfying in that. A lot of RPG inspired Flash games did this, and like most of them were good. I mentioned Swords and Sandals because I haven't actually beaten the game. That should be a stream. I should play that game. Um, but like that sort of gameplay loop I find really satisfying, which is part of why I'm making this game. Um, yeah, so that's basically my thoughts on the design for the game, and I just gotta build it, right? Um, yeah.